Today, we're about to explore an Everest climb where an influencer lied about the summit and others paid with their lives. It began with a single claim made far below the top of the mountain. What that claim set in motion would only become clear much higher up, where it spiraled into a chain of events that would haunt everyone on the mountain. It was April 29th, 2017, and Everest Base Camp sprawled across the Khumbu Glacier at 17,600 feet under a crystalline morning sky. The temperature was held at 19 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that exhaled breath hung visible in the thin air, but warm enough that climbers moved between tents without full expedition suits. The camp had swelled to nearly 800 people during the peak preparation window. Clients, guides, Sherpas, cooks, medical staff, and the support personnel required to sustain what had become a seasonal industry. Diesel generators hummed steadily, powering communications equipment and charging stations. Prayer flags stretched between clusters of tents, their colors vivid against the monochrome landscape of rock and ice. Among the arriving climbers was Chelsea Monroe, a 24-year-old from Los Angeles, whose TikTok account had grown from 12,000 followers to nearly 480,000 over the previous 14 months. Chelsea had built her audience through aspirational lifestyle content, luxury travel, fitness routines, motivational messaging about pushing boundaries and refusing to accept limitations. Her feed presented a curated narrative of transformation, positioning her as someone who had chosen adventure over comfort and achievement over complacency. The aesthetic was carefully constructed. Every post was color-graded for maximum impact, every caption workshopped for engagement, every location selected for its visual drama. Everest represented the apex of that narrative. Chelsea had announced the expedition 3 months earlier with a professionally produced video that featured training footage, sponsor acknowledgements, and emotional reflection about proving that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things. The video generated 2 million views and 16,000 comments, most expressing admiration and support. What the video did not mention was that Chelsea's climbing experience consisted of a single guided trek up Kilimanjaro completed 11 months earlier. She had no technical mountaineering training, no experience with fixed ropes or crampons, and no understanding of high-altitude physiology beyond what she had absorbed from YouTube videos and expedition blogs. Chelsea had paid $68,000 to join a commercial expedition operated by Summit Quest, a mid-tier guiding company that marketed itself as accessible to climbers with limited experience. The company's pitch emphasized support rather than prerequisites, promising that skilled Sherpas and Western guides would manage technical challenges while clients focused on endurance and determination. Chelsea's medical screening had been cursory, a questionnaire completed online and a single video call with an expedition coordinator who asked whether she had any serious health conditions. When asked about previous climbing experience, Chelsea described Kilimanjaro in language that suggested more technical complexity than the mountain actually required. The coordinator accepted her application without further verification. Her assigned Sherpa was Pemba Nuru, 31, a climber from Forts Village who had summited Everest 7 times across 9 years of guiding. Pemba supported his parents, 2 younger sisters, and his own 3 children on income earned during the brief climbing season. He had learned to read clients quickly, assessing their fitness, their judgment, their capacity to follow instructions under stress. Within 2 days of meeting Chelsea at base camp, Pemba understood she was underprepared. She moved slowly during acclimatization hikes. Her breathing labored at relatively modest altitudes. Her questions revealed gaps in basic mountaineering knowledge. She asked whether crampons were required for the entire climb, whether she would need to carry her own oxygen bottles, and whether helicopter evacuation was available from the summit. But Chelsea's social media presence was seamless. Her TikTok posts from base camp showed her laughing with other climbers, completing yoga poses against mountain backdrops, and delivering inspirational messages about embracing fear and trusting the process. The videos were edited to emphasize confidence and capability. She posted training footage that had been filmed weeks earlier in Los Angeles, presenting it as current preparation. Her followers had no reason to doubt the narrative she was constructing. The comments sections were filled with encouragement, with strangers telling her she was brave, that she was inspiring them to pursue their own challenges. The first acclimatization rotation began on May 3rd. The route through the Khumbu icefall required navigating a chaotic maze of crevasses, ice blocks, and aluminum ladders that shifted daily as the glacier ground downslope at roughly 3 feet per day. The the route gained approximately 2,000 vertical feet from base camp to Camp 1, with the worst hazards concentrated in sections where unstable seracs towered overhead and crevasses widened into slots that disappeared into blue shadow. Teams departed before dawn to minimize time in the danger zone, while the ice remained cold and stable. Chelsea struggled badly, the physical effort of ascending with crampons and a pack, the altitude sapping her strength, the exposure creating fear that slowed her movement. All of it combined into a grinding ordeal that required nearly 8 hours to complete a route that most clients finished in 4. Pemba stayed with her throughout, offering encouragement and managing her safety, but he could see that her body was not adapting to the altitude as it needed to. Her breathing remained rapid and shallow, even during rests. Her coordination was impaired, her foot placements uncertain. At one ladder, crossing over a particularly wide crevasse, she froze halfway across, paralyzed by the flex of the aluminum and the bottomless void below. Pemba had to talk her through each step, his voice calm and steady, while the rope team behind them waited with growing impatience. That evening at Camp 1, Chelsea posted a video that presented the climb as challenging but manageable, describing it as the hardest thing she had ever done, but emphasizing that her training had prepared her adequately. She did not mention the 8-hour duration or the moments of paralysis. She did not show the footage where Pemba had to physically guide her crampons onto ladder rungs. The video showed only her success, her determination, her smile as she raised a gloved fist toward the camera with Everest's upper slopes visible behind her. The post generated 43,000 likes and nearly 2,000 comments within 12 hours. The second rotation to Camp 2 revealed the same pattern. Chelsea moved slowly through the western Sai-Nim, the vast glacial valley that stretched for miles between the towering walls of Nuptse and Lhotse. The route crossed crevasse fields and traversed sections where the glacier's movement created unpredictable hazards. Chelsea required frequent rests, her face flushed despite the cold, her movements increasingly mechanical. After warming her hands inside his jacket and waiting for a stable reading, Pemba checked her oxygen saturation and found it at 69%, concerningly low, though not immediately dangerous. He explained that her body was struggling to acclimatize, that the numbers should be higher at this stage of the rotation schedule. He recommended additional rest days at base camp before attempting the next rotation to Camp 3. Chelsea's response was defensive. She insisted she felt fine, that the breathing difficulty was normal for this altitude, and that Pemba was being overly cautious. She asked whether other clients had similar numbers, and seemed to interpret Pemba's concern as doubt about her capability, rather than legitimate medical observation. That evening, she posted content describing the day's climb as difficult but successful, making no mention of her oxygen saturation readings or Pemba's recommendations. Her narrative remained consistent. She was pushing through challenges, adapting to the mountain, proving that determination could overcome obstacles. Also climbing with Summit Quest was Marcus Chan, 41, an emergency room physician from Seattle who had completed multiple high-altitude expeditions, including Denali, Aconcagua, and Cho Oyu. Marcus had summited Cho Oyu the previous year, reaching 26,864 feet without supplemental oxygen, demonstrating exceptional acclimatization capacity. His approach to climbing emphasized preparation and caution. He had trained rigorously, reviewed medical literature on high-altitude physiology, and approached Everest with respect for its dangers. Marcus was climbing with his assigned Sherpa, Lakpat Sering, 38, who had completed 13 Everest summits and was regarded as one of the most experienced guides working for Summit Quest. The third member was Sarah Lindstrom, 37, a high school teacher from Minnesota attempting her first 8,000-meter peak. Sarah had climbed Island Peak and Mara Peak in previous years, building a solid foundation of high-altitude experience. She was fit, cautious, and keenly aware of her limitations. Her assigned Sherpa was Dawa Gyaljan, 29, completing his 6th Everest season. The 3 clients became acquainted during rest days at base camp, sharing meals and discussing their preparations. Chelsea positioned herself as part of this group, posting photos with Marcus and Sarah that suggested camaraderie and shared capability. Marcus and Sarah were polite but maintained professional distance, both recognizing that Chelsea's experience level did not match their own. The critical rotation to Camp 3 occurred on May 11th. The climb from Camp 2 required ascending the Lhotse face, a steep blue ice wall that rose more than 2,000 vertical feet at angles between 40 and 50 degrees. Fixed ropes provided security, but the climbing demanded sustained cardiovascular effort and technical competence. Chelsea reached Camp 3 after 9 hours of climbing that left her completely exhausted. After warming her hands and taking multiple readings to confirm the result, her oxygen saturation at Camp 3 measured 62%, a number that placed her in dangerous territory. Pemba insisted they descend immediately, that continuing with these numbers would risk pulmonary or cerebral edema. Chelsea refused. She had not paid $70,000 to quit before the summit. She had trained for this. She had promised her followers she would reach the top. Descending now would destroy the narrative she had built over 14 months. She accused Pemba of undermining her confidence, of treating her differently from male climbers, of failing to provide the support she had paid for. The argument became heated enough that other climbers could hear raised voices from inside Chelsea's tent. Pemba radioed the expedition leader at base camp and explained the situation. The response was bureaucratic and unsatisfying. Chelsea had signed comprehensive liability waivers. Her vital signs were concerning but not immediately life-threatening, and forcing her descent would create legal and reputational complications for the company. Unless she became obviously incapacitated, the decision to continue was legally hers to make. Pemba was advised to document his concerns and continue providing support. The descent from Camp 3 to Camp 2 the following morning went slowly but without incident. Chelsea managed the technical sections adequately, and they reached Camp 2 in the early afternoon. They continued to base camp the next day to rest before the summit window. Hey, quick reminder that if this kind of in-depth coverage matters to you, subscribing and leaving a like helps support the channel. Make more videos like this. Now let's get back to the mountain. The weather window opened on May 18th. Meteorologists predicted a brief 36-hour period of reduced winds before another storm system moved in. Summit Quest finalized its climbing roster. Marcus and Sarah were cleared to attempt the summit, both having demonstrated excellent acclimatization and technical competence. Chelsea was explicitly excluded. Her oxygen saturation readings, her 9-hour ascent times, and her near paralysis on technical terrain made her a liability the company was unwilling to accept. The expedition leader delivered the news in person, explaining that she could attempt the summit in a future season after gaining more experience. Chelsea's response was immediate and calculated. She threatened to destroy Summit Quest's reputation across every platform where she had influence. She would post videos describing how the company had taken her money, led her to believe she would be supported, and then abandoned her within sight of the summit. She would name Pemba specifically as the guide who had undermined her from the beginning. She would ensure that her 480,000 followers understood exactly how she had been treated. The expedition leader held firm. Chelsea was not climbing. What happened next bypassed Summit Quest entirely. Chelsea approached a smaller budget operator, camped nearby, a company running a bare-bones expedition with minimal oversight and maximum flexibility. She offered $15,000 in cash for a spot on their summit roster. No questions asked. The operator, facing a season with fewer clients than projected, accepted the payment. Chelsea would climb with their team, using their Sherpa support, following their schedule. Summit Quest would not be involved or liable. The budget operator assigned Chelsea to climb with Dorje Lama, a 34-year-old Sherpa with 4 Everest summits, who had never worked with this client and knew nothing about her medical history or performance during acclimatization. He was told only that she was an experienced climber, transferring from another expedition. Chelsea told him her oxygen saturation had been reading in the high 70s throughout the rotation, a lie that would prove catastrophic. Dorje had heard rumors circulating through base camp about a social media climber who had been banned from her original expedition, but he had no reason to connect those rumors to the confident American woman now assigned to his rope. The budget operator had not shared details, and Dorje had not asked. In commercial guiding, clients came and went, and questions about why someone had switched expeditions were rarely welcomed. He assumed she had disagreed with her previous company over scheduling or fees, personality conflicts that happened every season. He did not assume she had been deemed medically unfit to climb. The summit push began on the evening of May 19th. Teams departed Camp 4 at staggered intervals, headlamps creating a serpentine chain of light ascending the southeast ridge. Chelsea started strong, the supplemental oxygen masking some of her body's distress, but her pace began deteriorating above the balcony at 27,600 feet. She stopped every 40 feet, her breathing ragged even through the oxygen mask, her legs trembling with each step. By the time she reached 28,000 feet, she had fallen far behind her assigned team. Dorja stayed with her, growing increasingly concerned as her condition deteriorated. Other climbing teams began stacking up behind them on the fixed ropes. The route narrowed to a single line in several sections, and Chelsea's glacial pace was creating a bottleneck that affected everyone ascending behind her. Marcus, Sarah, and their Sherpas were among those trapped in the growing queue. What should have been a steady climb became a stop-and-start ordeal, with teams waiting 10 and 15 minutes at a time, while Chelsea struggled through sections that competent climbers cleared in moments. The delays pushed everyone's timeline backward, consuming the safety margin that separated a successful summit from a fatal one. At 28,200 feet, approximately 600 feet below the summit, Chelsea collapsed. She sat down on the fixed line, her legs folded beneath her, and did not respond when Dorja urged her to stand. Her eyes were unfocused, her speech slurred when she spoke at all. The signs of cerebral edema were unmistakable. Her brain was swelling from the altitude, and without immediate descent, she would die. But Chelsea was blocking the only route. The fixed line ran through a narrow traverse where climbers could not easily pass, and her position made it impossible for ascending teams to continue or for descending teams to get through efficiently. Dorja radioed for help, his voice tight with controlled panic. Climbers began stacking up on both sides of the blockage, some trying to summit, others trying to descend before conditions deteriorated further. The mathematics of the situation was brutal. Every minute spent stationary at 28,200 feet cost climbers oxygen they could not replace and body heat they could not regenerate. The human body consumes roughly 4 liters of bottled oxygen per minute at that altitude, with regulators set to standard flow rates. The teams stacked behind Chelsea were burning through their supplies while accomplishing nothing, watching their survival margins shrink with each passing moment. Some climbers had planned their oxygen loads down to the hour. Those plans were now meaningless. Dawa Gyalzin moved forward to help. He had been climbing behind Sarah when the bottleneck formed, and his instinct was to assist however he could. He clipped into the fixed line beside Chelsea and began trying to lift her, to move her to a position where other climbers could pass. The situation was chaotic. Multiple people shouting instructions, the wind building steadily, the cold sapping everyone's reserves. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. As Dawa struggled with Chelsea's weight, she lurched sideways in a moment of confused resistance, her arm swinging outward and catching Dawa across the chest. The impact was not forceful, but at 28,200 feet, on a narrow traverse with a 40-degree ice slope falling away below, it was enough. Dawa's crampon points skittered on the hard-packed snow. His grip on the fixed rope slipped. He fell backward, his safety tether shock-loading against an anchor that was already bearing the weight of multiple climbers. The anchor held. Dawa's tether did not. The carabiner gate, stressed beyond its design limits by the angular load, failed catastrophically. Dawa Gyalzin fell more than 800 feet down the southeast face, his body disappearing into the gray void before anyone could react. His remains were never recovered. The chaos that followed was absolute. Climbers who had witnessed the fall were screaming. Others were trying to push past Chelsea's still motionless form to begin their own descent. The carefully coordinated summit push had collapsed into every man for himself survival. Pemba was not supposed to be there. After Chelsea was banned from Summit Quest's roster, he had been reassigned to support the Summit team, carrying extra oxygen and emergency supplies, a role that placed him above Camp 4 during the window. When Dawa fell, Pemba was 300 feet below, ascending with cached bottles. He heard the commotion on the radio and pushed upward to help. What Pemba found was a disaster in progress. Chelsea was barely conscious, blocking the route. Dorja was overwhelmed, trying to manage his client while other climbers shoved past. Marcus and Lakpa were attempting to coordinate an orderly descent, but the traffic jam had made efficient movement impossible. Sarah was showing early signs of altitude sickness, confusion, slowed responses that would worsen rapidly if she remained at this elevation. Pemba took charge because someone had to. He physically lifted Chelsea and moved her to a small platform off the main route, clearing the fixed line for other climbers. He directed traffic, telling ascending teams to turn back immediately, creating space for descending climbers to move. He burned through his own energy reserves doing work that should have been shared among multiple Sherpas, but the others were scattered across the mountain, dealing with their own emergencies. The descent became a running battle against time. Sarah's condition deteriorated, with terrifying speed. The cerebral edema that had begun as confusion and slowed responses progressed into something worse. She began speaking to people who were not there, asking Lakpa questions about her classroom in Minnesota, calling him by her father's name. By 27,500 feet, Lakpa was essentially dragging her, her legs moving in mechanical steps, but her mind no longer connected to her body. Her eyes were open, but she saw nothing on the mountain. Whatever Sarah was experiencing in her final hours existed somewhere far from the southeast ridge. Marcus helped where he could, but his own oxygen was running low, and the cold was beginning to affect his coordination. Chelsea was being half-carried by Dorje and another Sherpa who had descended from above, her weight slowing everyone behind her. At 27,000 feet, Sarah stopped breathing. Lakpa checked for a pulse and found nothing. He attempted rescue breathing, but at that altitude, with that level of oxygen deprivation, there was nothing to be done. They left her body clipped to the fixed line and continued down. Pemba reached Camp 4 at 11 in the morning, more than 12 hours after the summit push began. He had been above 26,000 feet for nearly 20 hours, far longer than the human body could sustain without consequences. His oxygen had run out 2 hours earlier. His movements were uncoordinated, his speech slurred, his skin showing the waxy pallor of severe hypothermia. He collapsed outside a tent and did not get up. Other climbers found him 40 minutes later. They dragged him inside, forced warm fluids into him, and covered him with sleeping bags. His core temperature had dropped to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. His heart was beating erratically, struggling to pump blood that had thickened in the cold. At 2:47 p.m., surrounded by climbers who had done everything they could, Pemba Nuru's heart stopped. He was 31 years old. Sarah Lindstrom's body remained on the upper southeast ridge for the remainder of the season, clipped to the fixed rope just below 27,000 feet. Recovery was deemed impossible given her position, the weather, and the continued congestion on the route. Marcus Chen made it down to Camp 2 alive, but his condition continued to deteriorate. Despite supplemental oxygen and aggressive warming, Marcus's breathing worsened overnight, turning rapid and wet as fluid filled his lungs. At 21,200 feet, his oxygen levels continued to fall, despite maximum flow. In the early hours of May 21st, Marcus went into cardiac arrest inside his tent at Camp 2. Resuscitation efforts failed. He was pronounced dead shortly after sunrise. The official cause of death was high-altitude pulmonary edema, compounded by prolonged hypoxia. He was 41 years old. Chelsea Monroe survived. She was evacuated by helicopter from Camp 2 the following day, suffering from severe frostbite and the lingering effects of cerebral edema. She lost 2 fingers on her left hand and portions of 3 toes. She never reached the summit of Everest. Lakpa Tsering survived with similar injuries. 8 other climbers died during the same weather window, pushing the season's death toll to 11, one of the deadliest in recent Everest history. The investigation cited multiple contributing factors, including weather, overcrowding, inadequate screening, and cascading delays caused by an unqualified climber during the summit window. Chelsea's name appeared in the final report, though no charges were filed. The families of Dawa Gyaltsen and Pemba Nuru each received $15,000 in expedition insurance, roughly 3 years of guiding income. Pemba's 3 children moved in with his parents in Forts Village. Sarah Lindstrom's family received her personal effects. Marcus Chen's body was returned to the United States, his death recorded as the result of high-altitude exposure during rescue efforts. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.